You think empty space is nothing. You imagine a clean background, a silent stage, a place where nothing happens. You were taught that if you remove everything, matter, light, heat, you are left with absence, a true zero. This feels obvious. It feels safe. But this picture is fragile. You assume reality needs things in order to exist. You assume nothing is simple. You assume emptiness is passive. You are wrong. The idea of an empty vacuum is not a discovery, it is an assumption. And it is an assumption that quietly fails the moment you look at it too closely. You trust your intuition because it feels neutral, because it feels reasonable, because it feels unavoidable. But physics does not care how unavoidable something feels. There is no such thing as nothing waiting patiently in the background. There is no quiet place where reality switches off. The vacuum is not empty. And once you accept that, the idea of reality itself becomes unstable. You think nothing is the easiest idea you possess. It feels effortless. It asks for no justification. It appears when everything else is removed. You trust it because it seems obvious. When you imagine an empty vacuum, you imagine the absence of demand, no structure, no activity, no resistance, a place where reality finally relaxes. This is not a discovery. It is a habit. You learned to think this way long before physics entered the picture. You learned it from everyday subtraction. A table without objects, a room without furniture, a sky without clouds. Each time something remained, and you call that remainder empty, but none of these were ever nothing. They were spaces still governed by rules you never questioned. They still had dimensions. They still allowed motion. They still carried expectations about what could happen next. Your intuition quietly equates emptiness with silence. If nothing is there, nothing should occur. No events, no change, no obligation for explanation. This is where the error begins. Silence is not absence. Stillness is not non-existent. You assume that reality, when stripped down far enough, must eventually become simple. That complexity belongs to things, not to the absence of things. But this assumption has no physical origin. It is psychological. It comes from a need for a stopping point, a final layer where questioning ends. The idea of nothing functions as that stopping point. You believe emptiness is passive because you believe passivity is natural. You expect the universe to default to rest unless disturbed. This expectation is borrowed from human scale experience, where friction hides motion and equilibrium feels normal. Nature does not share this preference. When you say there is nothing here, you are not describing a state you have measured. You are asserting that nothing needs to be accounted for. You are declaring that explanation is no longer required. Physics never agreed to this. Even the act of pointing to an empty region assumes that the region exists, that it has identity, that it persists over time, that it can be distinguished from elsewhere. These are not trivial assumptions. Persistence is a rule. Distinguishability is a rule. Continuity is a rule. None of these belong to nothing. The moment you accept that an empty region can be pointed to, returned to, or discussed, you have already granted it structure. And structure is activity in disguise. You imagine the vacuum as a background, a container waiting patiently for contents. This metaphor feels harmless. It feels necessary. It is wrong. A background is not neutral. The container is not absent. Anything that can hold something must obey constraints about what it can hold, how it responds, and how it remains consistent. Those constraints are not decorations. They are reality asserting itself. Your intuition tells you that absence should be the most stable condition, that once everything is gone, nothing can disturb it, that the vacuum should be immune to change. This belief has no basis in nature. Stability is not a gift reality gives freely. It must be enforced, and enforcement requires rules. Rules are not nothing. The illusion of absence survives because it is comfortable. It allows you to believe that complexity is optional, that the universe could have been simpler if it wanted to be. But simplicity is not the same as emptiness. The vacuum is not a blank canvas. It is a system under constraint. Even before anything appears within it, it already refuses certain possibilities and permits others. That refusal is not passive. It is an active consistency. You do not notice this because intuition filters it out. Intuition only notices events. It ignores the conditions that make events possible or impossible. But physics lives in those conditions. The belief in nothing as a baseline is not supported by observation or logic. It is supported by habit, by language, by the quiet assumption that absence must be easier than presence. This assumption fails. Once it fails, the vacuum stops being a place where reality disappears. It becomes a place where reality reveals how little it cares about your mental shortcuts. And the moment that shift occurs, emptiness is no longer a refuge from explanation. It is the beginning of a deeper problem. You think mathematics comes after reality. You imagine equations as annotations, marks written in the margins of the universe, useful but secondary. Reality happens first, math comes later. This belief feels modest, it feels reasonable, it feels harmless, it is wrong. You are taught that equations describe what is already there, that they summarize patterns we notice after the fact, that they are clever compressions of experience, not participants in it. In this picture, mathematics is quiet, reality is loud. Dirac did not see it this way. For him, an equation was not a translation of nature into symbols, it was a statement of permission, a declaration of what the universe allows and what it forbids. This difference is subtle, and it is devastating. If equations merely describe, then reality has freedom. It can behave first, and we can chase after it with better notation. But if equations constrain, then reality is already restricted before anything happens. Your intuition resists this. It wants equations to be passive. It wants mathematics to stay in its place. But the vacuum does not respect this boundary. When you imagine empty space, you imagine silence. You expect nothing to impose order there, no objects, no events, no demands. Yet the moment you write down the rules that reality must obey, silence disappears, not audibly, structurally. An equation does not wait for particles to exist before it applies. It does not activate only when something interesting shows up. It applies everywhere, always, without exception, including where you expect nothing. This is the quiet violence of mathematics. It does not announce itself. It does not dramatize its role. It simply refuses to allow certain states of reality to exist even in the vacuum. You might think this is philosophical. It is not. It is logical. An equation that governs the universe cannot selectively turn off. If it did, it would not be a law. It would be a suggestion. Dirac understood this with unsettling clarity. He trusted equations more than intuition, not because equations were perfect, but because intuition was provincial. It evolved to survive tables, stones, and distances, not to judge the behavior of nothingness. So when an equation implies something strange, Dirac did not ask whether it felt reasonable. He asked whether it was consistent. Consistency mattered more than comfort. If mathematics demanded structure in a vacuum, then structure existed, whether anyone liked it or not. This is where equations stop being descriptive and become confrontational. They do not ask what you expect. They ask what you are willing to give up. The vacuum under mathematical law cannot be arbitrary. It cannot be a blank slate. It must satisfy the same constraints as everything else. Symmetry, continuity, conservation. These are not optional. They are enforced even in the absence of things. You may object that equations are human inventions. Those symbols are not reality. That mathematics lives on paper, not in space. This objection misses the point. The symbols are not reality, the constraints are. Mathematics is not powerful because of ink or chalk. It is powerful because it encodes relationships that reality cannot violate without collapsing into contradiction. Dirac's equations were unforgiving in this way. They did not allow hand-waving. They did not tolerate intuitive exceptions. When applied to the vacuum, they did not remain quiet. They spoke, not loudly, not emotionally, but decisively. They insisted that the vacuum obey the same logic as the rest of the universe, and once that insistence is accepted, emptiness loses its innocence. The vacuum is no longer a place where rules stop applying. It is where rules are most exposed, stripped of distractions. Here, equations are not summaries. They are guardians. They stand at the boundary of possibility, filtering what can exist from what cannot, even when nothing seems to be there at all. This is uncomfortable because it reverses the usual hierarchy. Reality does not come first. Consistency does, and consistency has consequences. The moment you accept that equations constrain the vacuum, you accept that nothing must still obey rules. That absence is not free. That silence is structured. The mathematics does not care whether this aligns with your mental picture. It will not soften its demands. It will not explain itself. It will simply refuse to allow the vacuum to be empty in the way you imagined. You think rest is natural. You imagine that if everything were removed, what remains would be still. No motion, no fluctuation, no change. A perfect calm. This belief feels ancient, it feels reasonable, it feels final. It is wrong. Stillness is not the default state of reality. It is an achievement. And achievements require enforcement. At human scales, rest appears everywhere. Objects stop moving. Rooms grow quiet. Systems settle. This trains you to believe that motion fades away if left alone. But what you are observing is not stillness. It is balanced. Motion cancelled by motion. Activity hidden by symmetry. You mistake cancellation for absence. The vacuum offers no such hiding place. In an empty region, there are no objects to slow down, no surfaces to absorb energy, no friction to erase motion. There's nothing to damp activity into rest. Your intuition insists that without things, there can be no motion. But motion does not belong to things. It belongs to relationships. And relationships do not disappear just because objects do. You imagine freezing the vacuum, holding it in perfect inactivity, a state where nothing changes, even in principle. This picture collapses under consistency. To be perfectly still, the system must be precisely defined. It must have exact boundaries, exact values, exact conditions. Exactness is not free. The more precisely you try to lock a system into rest, the more structure you must impose. And imposed structure is itself a form of activity. This is not a technical problem, it is a logical one. A vacuum that sits perfectly still would have to be completely isolated from time, no evolution, no possibility of change. But time is not an external switch you can turn off. It is woven into the rules that govern existence. If time applies, then change is not optional. Even the possibility of change destabilizes perfect rest. You might try to imagine a deeper stillness, a level below time itself, a frozen foundation where nothing happens and nothing can happen. This is where the idea breaks. A system that cannot change is not stable. It is undefined. Without the possibility of evolution, there's no way to specify what the system is. Identity requires the ability to persist through change. A thing that cannot change cannot be said to remain the same. It has no meaning across time. Perfect rest is not peaceful. It is incoherent. The vacuum, governed by consistent laws, cannot exist in an incoherent state. It must be well defined. It must be able to respond, even if nothing is present to provoke it. That responsiveness forbids absolute stillness. Dirac understood this not as a dramatic revelation, but as a constraint. If the laws apply everywhere, then they apply to the vacuum. If they involve time, then time acts on the vacuum. And if time acts, something happens. Not visibly, not energetically, but structurally. The vacuum cannot sit still, because stillness would require the laws to suspend themselves. And laws do not suspend themselves. You may object that this motion is invisible, that nothing is observed moving, that instruments detect nothing at rest. This objection assumes that motion must resemble what you already know. But at the deepest level, activity does not look like objects traveling through space. It looks like the refusal of reality to lock itself into a single final configuration. The vacuum is not calm, it is constrained, and constraint is dynamic. A perfectly resting vacuum would be simpler than the laws that govern it. But reality does not permit simpler states than its own rules. The rules come first. The states must comply. So the vacuum does not drift toward rest. It cannot. There is no mechanism that allows it to settle without contradiction. Instead, it remains in a state that is not motion and not stillness, but something more precise and more disturbing. A state that changes without moving, that evolves without events, that refuses to be frozen. This is not because the vacuum is energetic or chaotic. It is because perfect rest is incompatible with consistency. Once this is understood, the idea of an inert background collapses completely. There is no silent layer beneath reality, no motionless floor. There is only a vacuum that cannot sit still, because stillness is a demand the universe refuses to satisfy. You think reality is conservative, You believe it only contains what it must, only what is visible, only what can be pointed to. This belief feels disciplined, it feels scientific, it feels safe, it is wrong. You assume that what exists must announce itself, that if something were real, it would leave a trace you could recognize, a signal, an effect, a disturbance. You assume reality does not tolerate excess, but the vacuum does not share this restraint. Once you stop treating emptiness as passive, the idea of completeness collapses. The vacuum is no longer a minimal state, it is a constrained state. And constrained systems do not get to choose simplicity. They must satisfy consistency. Consistency is expensive. Dirac discovered this in the quietest way possible, not by observing new phenomena, but by refusing to ignore what his equations demanded. The mathematics did not ask whether certain entities were visible. It did not ask whether they were intuitive. It only asked whether excluding them would create contradiction, and it did. The vacuum, taken seriously, does not allow reality to be sparse. It does not allow existence to be limited to what you've already catalogued. If the laws apply everywhere, then they apply even when nothing is observed, and when they apply, they generate consequences whether you want them or not. Some of those consequences look impossible. Entities that seem to violate common sense, states that appear forbidden, features that have no classical interpretation, your instinct is to reject them, to label them artifacts, mathematical ghosts, convenient fictions. Dirac did not. He understood that impossibility is often a statement about intuition, not about nature. When equations insist on something that intuition resists, intuition is usually the weaker party. The vacuum does not negotiate. It demands completeness, not observational completeness, but logical completeness. Every allowed configuration must be accounted for, or the structure collapses. If you forbid something without justification, the system breaks elsewhere. This is unsettling because it means reality is not curated. It is not edited for clarity. It does not remove elements just because they feel unnecessary. The vacuum tolerates no gaps. When mathematics forces the existence of something you cannot see, the correct response is not disbelief, it is uncomfortable. Discomfort is a signal that your mental model is failing. The belief that reality only contains what we observe is not cautious, it is naive. It assumes observation defines existence rather than merely sampling it. The vacuum exposes the flaw in this belief. It is observable as emptiness, yet governed by laws that are anything but empty. Those laws do not stop generating structure simply because your instruments are silent. They continue, and what they generate does not ask for permission. Some of these entities do not appear as stable objects. They do not sit patiently in space. They do not behave like things. They exist as necessities, as solutions that must be included for the equations to remain honest. Calling them unreal does not remove them, it only reveals your refusal to follow the logic to its end. Dirac was willing to follow it. He accepted that if the vacuum is governed by the same principles as everything else, then it must allow states that seem to come from nowhere and vanish without explanation, not because nature is careless, but because nature is consistent. The idea of impossibility assumes a background of common sense. The vacuum erases that background. What appears forbidden is often only forbidden by habit. Once the vacuum is understood as active, as constrained, as subject to the same demands as matter and energy, the category of unreal loses its authority. Reality becomes larger than observation, not emotionally, not metaphorically, structurally. You no longer get to assume that what you see is all there is. You no longer get to assume that absence means exclusion. The vacuum includes what must exist, not what you expect to exist. And this is the disturbing conclusion. Some things exist not because they are detected, but because the alternative would make reality inconsistent. They are not optional, they are required. The universe does not ask whether you are ready for them. It only asks whether you are willing to accept that your sense of possibility has no veto power. Once this is understood, the vacuum stops being empty in a deeper way. It becomes crowded with necessity, and necessity does not care how impossible it feels.